Hello, and welcome to another episode of Creating Cultures that Outperform. Today, we have another great AI episode for you. We're digging deeply into AI and how to really have an AI-ready culture. So we're going to be talking about trust first, tech second. I'm here with my fantastic co-hosts, George Pace, Keep Pace Technology, and Terry Mays, certified culture engineer. You probably know me, Frank Wander, founder of People Productive, and most recently, Boardroom Edge. So let's get right into it. Trust is just fundamental because it facilitates an organization's willingness to accept AI-driven change. And boy, this is a big change, and there's going to have to be a lot of trust for people to accept it. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think we're hitting the nail right on top of the head, because if you want people to adopt these new technologies that are different, so AI is a little bit scary to everybody, right?
Yep.
So most organizations, they don't have very tech savvy organizations to start with, and now you're asking them to do something with robots and machines. And so that's going to cause people more concern. They're going to feel like, this is something that can take my job. So I don't want to learn it. I don't want to do it. I want to stay around. And as an organization leader, you have to make sure your people don't feel like that. You have to have trust in that organization where they know that you're taking them in a strategic direction, that they're not being replaced by AI. That's what everybody thinks. So you've got to address that right from the start and let people know that there's a place for humans in the new world. We're not trying to replace humans with technology, but instead let the technology enable humans to be able to do the better work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting, but we know that, this technology is going to replace people. So I think they have to be honest that some people will be replaced.
Yeah, but not in the sense that there's no place for you anymore.
Oh, no,
right?
No. They've got to explain that or augment.
Yeah, you've got to clarify that. Yes, AI is going to replace some things that people do, but there's always going to be a need for people, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to replace your entire organization with AI.
No, but they've got to be honest, right?
Yeah. You're right.
Automation
You're exactly
results
right.
in certain jobs going away and new ones being created.
That's the piece that I think is missing. Everybody is focusing on, oh, my job may go away, but nobody is talking about, but these new things are going to emerge for people to do.
Yeah.
Well, and remember, we're still talking about, and we talked about this last episode, about this area being the quote unquote Wild West in a lot of ways. So hallucinations, exactly what happens between versions. This concept of trust is really an overarching theme of who is going to be the arbiters, as it were, to say, we trust these things in AI and we trust that we need these positions. So trust to me is something I've talked about as well, long talked about, but I think we're going to see it more, and I think we talk about it in the next couple of slides.
Yeah. So let's go on and talk about, what actually is trust in an enterprise and why is it so important? Some people have said that you can't do anything without trust. It's fundamental to humans. Humans are wired to trust or distrust. Matter of fact, 90% of the midbrain is wired for spotting threats. It's a threat sensor, your limbic system. And so trust is so fundamental to us as human beings that you can't actually do anything unless there's trust. I always liken it as the invisible thread that connects people, creating a culture's social fabric. So trust is earned. And in an era where teams of people create value, not individuals, you're going to have trust supporting these teams, bringing the people together so they can work cohesively with one another in an open and honest way. And there are different forms of trust. The most common one everybody understands is interpersonal trust, which is, I trust you. You're not going to hurt me. And that goes for both a leader and a coworker, because you got to trust both. They're a little different. Organizational trust. Oh, George, you want to get into this?
Yeah. At the end of the day, organizational trust really talks about, will the organization put those pieces and parts into place that are going to help us be successful in the tasks that we're going to achieve. And that, sometimes that tends to be problematic because there be these projects tend to be one-offs or a series of one-offs or even a big bang where they're trying to do a singular thing, but they don't necessarily have all the supporting pieces such as the budget, the prioritization, the attention of the downstream teams that need to interact with them. So in order to deliver successfully in this world, organizations are really going to need to align their resources in such a way that promotes success rather than hinder it.
Yeah. And, is the organization going to be in the way? Are we going to get a fair shot at learning this stuff? Or are they just going to bring in people from outside, to do all of it? What kind of processes are they putting in place in the organization? And Tara, we've talked about strategic trust many times. You may want to jump on that, right?
Yeah. So this is all about, funding, enabling, prioritizing, not just saying that we are going in this direction, but actually putting the funding that's necessary there to enable the different strategies that we have. We've got organizational plans. We've got to do things with culture, and definitely got to make sure that talent is getting taken care of in the entire process. Make sure that people have access to learning modules so they can learn how to use these new tools. So there's a lot that goes into that strategic trust. And when you feel like you can't trust your organization and you can't trust the direction that they're going in, or you can't figure out the direction that they're going in, then people start to feel like I need to fend for myself. I need to make my own plans. I need to decide where I want to be in the organization, if I want to stay in this organization at all. You end up with people feeling like there's no place for me. And again, I think that goes back to just letting people know that the people aren't going away. There's still going to be a need for you. And this is where you fit into the overall strategy. This is where you as an individual fit. And then now, okay, these are the skill sets I need to develop. I have a learning journey now because I know that this is the role that I'm going to, or this is the type work that I'll be doing in the future. So now I can plan for that and I can organize myself for that and take the right training courses and make sure I'm reading the right articles and doing the right research. But if I don't know where we're going strategically, then it's going to be difficult for me to fit in and feel like I can trust where we're going without making my own plans. And that's what people to do.
And interestingly, right, we talked about last week, future-proofing yourself, essential human skills that you could use. The organization's got to future-proof itself. It's got to let people know we're going to be here. We're going to be successful. We're doing all the right things. And then you could trust the organization to take you into a good future. And I think people are going to be looking at what actions is leadership taking to really do it. And, we were chatting about this before, and George had suggested that we put this in here, that when the prior slide doesn't come to fruition, I mean, if they don't do those things right on the prior slide, then you end up with some type of underperformance or failure.
Or debt.
Or just,
or just plain old technical debt. And that's the other challenge too. If we go back to the other slide just real quickly for a second, sure. There's an overlap. There's an overlap on that organizational versus strategic. And I've seen this in multiple instances where there's a strategy that comes down off on high, and you're like, okay, that's the strategy. But the problem is that organizationally they were never given the tools or the resources to affect that strategic change. So if you now come into digital transformations by their nature are disruptive to an organization. They're going to impact downstream systems. They're going to require a prioritization of activities that team may or may not have the resources to take on. And what happens is you start getting into these battles of trying to do, each one is responsible for, again, we talked about this last week, you do what you're incented to do. But if you don't, if the enterprise strategy does not put into place the supporting mechanisms, or has the organization put those supporting mechanisms in, you're going to see this time and time again.
Yeah. 100% right.
Yeah. If it can't just be one digital transformation office, this notion that you can just have one person that kind of transforms the whole organization is really not sufficient. And so you've got to make sure that you've got strengthened programs and projects. Your strategy implementation is strong, that you're not just assigning these things willy-nilly with just, one person in these roles thinking that they're going to effectively change an entire organization.
Mm-hmm.
You'll never get enterprise-wide adoption with one person.
Or a team, even one team, like
right.
Office of Innovation always failed.
Yeah.
Well,
you've got to embed this new way of thinking across the organization. It has to be from top down. There has to be priority on it. So we've talked about that with funding, but also with leaders taking the charge to say, yes, we are adopting these tools and we want everybody to adopt them and do that in practice and not just in wording.
And remember how this manifests itself today in organizations with bolt-on thinking. If we can just dip our toe in the water and figure this piece out, the other pieces will happen. This is not the case. I mean, it may have been the case in previous technologies, not this one. And if you attack this as a bolt-on effort, you're not going to be as successful. I can tell you that.
No, you're not. Experience. I mean, you got to build the knowledge and the capabilities across every part of the enterprise. And I think, how many times, like you said, George, have we seen they go out with this enterprise strategy, but they really don't push it down through the whole organization. Different areas, approach it differently. And so you end up with this mishmash where the company really didn't transform itself and they didn't hold people accountable and they didn't fund it in every area. Not everybody embraced it. And that is just so typical. And that leads to what we see in many companies, this very, very weak digital transformation. All the studies show that most of these transformations are returning very few benefits. They've invested lots of money, but they're getting very little out of it.
What is that number? It's like 77% of these efforts fail, or it's in the 70s.
Numbers. And there's different studies, and they're all high. And the ones that made it returned 30% of what the estimated benefits were in the beginning. That was a very common number. And so this is a real problem. And AI is going to go the same way because they never actually did lessons learned on any of these failures. And so what really happens when you have trust in the organization? What shows up? Hey, we trust the leaders. We feel good about them. They're taking us in a good direction. I'm going to start to embrace the change and be on board the bus with everybody else. People start to work as a team, and all those things that show up in a trust-based organization, sharing behaviors, helping behaviors, the ability to speak up, people able to question what's going on. And we went through the importance of questioning, not just the results, but everything going on. If you don't have a questioning culture, you're not going to make it. And, in a great team, people can raise any question and it's okay. And then breaking down those walls and silos, which is going to be very important with this cross-functional collaboration. And that's going to be huge.
Just remember the old expression, you can't expect change without changing.
Yeah.
That's right.
This is true.
You got to be willing to change, and you've got to get rid of the fear of changing. So if the fear is still there, if people still don't really trust, when there's fear, you really don't trust.
Well, if there's a penalty for the perception of failure, that's the killer right there.
Right.
This is the one where I come into the room every day and I turn the light switch on and the light goes on. I want you to change everything, but make sure the light still goes on. Well, wait a minute. You got to rethink what you just said, because we may actually break that light once. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
So.
And, good cultures, where they've gotten rid of fear of failure, they may call some of the stuff in the beginning experiments instead of the project, so that it's okay. People know it may not work perfectly.
Right.
Good cultures deal with this stuff. They get rid of that fear of failure. Yeah. And so AI trust attributes, what do we end up with here? Anybody want to start off?
Oh, I'll start. Terry was talking earlier about, the new roles that are going to evolve. And if you just look at this list, there are so many issues that corporations and companies today don't necessarily have a good handle on. And I can do in any of the order here. This is not in any particular order. What does it mean to bring a model in the front door? Do you trust it? Or is it going to align with where your organization wants to go? Is a question. To me, data quality. I mean, you could probably spend tens of millions of dollars getting your data just organized to successfully participate in this field. Remember the old expression, garbage in, garbage out. If you are putting data in from multiple sources and that data is not consistent, you're in for a nightmare. This whole black box of decision making. I talk about this all the time. What happens if you build a process and you're using version 1 of a widget and version 2 of the widget now returns a different answer? Maybe it's a better answer. How do you handle that? And then, this whole idea of, how long are humans in the loop? Well, what does that mean organizationally? You just can't say we trust it and walk away and never get back to it ever again. There's oversight and governance to this.
Forever.
So forever. I mean, it doesn't go away. It changes. So, we're going to be, and Frank's going to tell you, we're going to talk more about this aspect in future episodes. But this idea of trust is going to be more significant than you realize over the course of, I think, the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think companies are going to overtrust in some cases. They're going to roll this stuff out. They'll be under pressure to get it done. I see this being a remake of the Titanic, honestly. It's unsinkable. Don't worry about it. They're going to get comfortable with the technology. They're going to turn something on, and you're going to have, a million transactions go through, and they're just going to be, many of them wrong, which will go undetected for a while. And this whole thing of the black box of AI decision making, one of the things that you see in risk management always is the ability to detect the error. And so I think there's a lack of detectability because of the way some of this stuff is going to get built out. Not only do you have the bad data, you have a model with 1 billion parameters in it. Who knows? That no one quite understands how, in fact, it gets to the answer. So lots of issues here.
Well, let's even on that black box one, let's just take what is being marketed today. You have, Salesforce and Workday and Microsoft and Oracle and all the big boys and girls are out there coming up with their agents. And that agent, by the way, an intelligent agent could be talking to other agents behind the scene. Well, now if you listen to them, they're talking that we're going to build these quote unquote workflows. Well, what if a workflow has 20 intelligent agents in it, and each of those agents comes from a different source? One's internal from Department A, one's internal to Department B. You now have external ones. Who in God's name is looking at all of this and monitoring this and rolling out future versions of this? This is, I tend to look ahead, but if you look at that workflow and say to yourself, I have a 20-step workflow and each step is different or provided by somebody else, what does that look like in terms of trust? What does that look like from organizational rigor? There's a lot of work coming.
And I'll tell you what, I would go down the road of let's not relive all the errors of the past. They've always put a $0 value on institutional knowledge. The people who finally know and understand the data, how these systems are working, naturally going to get somebody with the same role who's going to be half the price. And they've made this mistake 1 million times. And that years of learning goes out the door. And the time to competency is huge. And all the social capital goes out the door, all the relationships, everything. I hope companies have learned their lesson and that they build and grow people and understand humans are assets that are meant to be grown. And they actually understand the value of all that accumulated knowledge. See, it's not on a balance sheet anywhere. These people are learning enormous amounts of stuff. And, it's going to be expensive over time. They're going to be adding all these new people and roles. And somebody's going to come in and go, well, I'll give you a body to do that for half the price. And out goes, $500,000 of learning. And that's what I just predict that's going to happen. That stupidity is going to arise again.
Yep.
Yeah, kind of crazy. So, our next episode, we're going to talk about what does this all cost you? We're going to dig into this to the next layer down, start getting into what kind of costs are you looking at here to actually do this? So we're here every Wednesday at 3:00. We have another broadcast. I hope you're enjoying this series on AI ready cultures, and human machine teaming. Human machine teaming is going to be super important. And not only do the people have to trust one another, you're going to have to trust what AI is doing as well. So this is so fundamental to trust is so fundamental to the future performance of these companies. I don't think people realize how important this is going to be.
Yep. I do. I do.
So listen, we'll see you. Hope you could join us next week as we get into what does trust actually cost. So we'll be here next Wednesday, 3:00. See you.